Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm back with another video. It's Tuesday evening here. It's December 23rd. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve, and the day after that, of course, is Christmas. So I thought I would do something a little bit different this time. The topic of this is movies, a force for awareness or a force for brainwashing. The reason why I bring it up is because, of course, during the Christmas holiday season, we've got kind of a week off between Christmas and New Year's, and people spend a lot of time watching movies. This is true, it's apparently true across cultures. And, one of the first Christmas type one of the movies that people used to watch a lot, maybe they still do, I don't know, is The Wizard of Oz. And The Wizard of Oz, it was, follow the yellow brick road. It was actually, I didn't know about this until years later, but it was actually written by this guy who was talking about the gold standard and the fact that there was something, he was talking about the world monetary system, basically. And maybe, I think there may be something to do with the Wicked Witch of the West. I think, as I think about it, I think there may be something to that. Of course, the Wizard of Oz, who is this guy who was, he had mystified everybody and with this, I am Oz, the great and terrible. And then, Dorothy and her dog show up at the Wizard of Oz headquarters, so to speak, and little Toto goes behind the curtain, and the Wizard of Oz says, "Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain." And I'm kind of thinking that seems quite evocative of some politicians that I can think of from either party, but there's a particular one who he actually kind of looks like. I won't mention any names, but you know who I'm talking about. He actually looks kind of like the Wizard of Oz, with the same color hair and the body type and stuff like that. And the way he acts is kind of like, "I am Trump." Oh God, we're in such trouble. When are people going to wake up? But he talks about the yellow brick road, which is talking about the gold standard. Actually, it was about the world monetary system and about how unequal things were. So that was interesting. But there's a lot of other movies, and the thing that I want to bring out is the fact that in earlier years there was Hollywood and the movie industry was started by people who were quite visionary and progressive in their thinking. So and I've left some links to some movies in the description below my video here. But like one of the movies that I'm thinking of is Charlie Chaplin did a lot of stuff that was really, really cool, like Modern Times, where he's showing people on an assembly line, and he did another movie called The Great Dictator, which was warning the American people about Hitler. Actually, it was a spoof about Hitler. But there was other movies like The Grapes of Wrath, which were, talking about the serious inequality in the country and serious problems. And that was I think that was in the 1940s. And Casablanca was an example of, this guy who's a kind of a cynic, but he's really got a heart of gold, and he's trying to help people, free themselves from these gangsters who were, had taken control of Casablanca, which is a city in northern Africa where many of the Free French forces had kind of coalesced against Hitler. They were escaping from Hitler's clutches. Let's see, there's another, For Whom the Bell Tolls, is an amazing movie. It was with Gary. What was his last name? He was a very famous actor, Gary. The last name escapes me at the moment, but it's about an American who goes and fights against the fascists in Spain during the Spanish Civil War, and it's an amazing love story between him and this young woman who had been essentially abused by the fascists in Spain. And there he is, and he's fighting with them. And he's trying to. He had a mission to prevent a breakthrough of these fascist forces, and he succeeds. He succeeds, but at the cost of his own life. So there's that movie. Then a couple of very, very important movies that happened during World War II. One of them was it was called the Battle of Russia, and this movie was made by the War Department, and that is the U.S. It was called during World War II. It was called the War Department, and it is a documentary talking about the history of Russia and the fact that it has been attacked many, many times. Why? Because it's rich. It has a lot of resources. And here we are, like 80 years later, and there's still fight going on there's still a battle for Russia over its resources. So that's another example, and it shows the thing that's so amazing about that movie is that it starts off with these statements by these U.S. leaders praising the Soviet Union for its gallantry and its heroism and its abilities to fight the Nazis. And it was just, they couldn't say enough good things about the Soviet Union. So that is really in itself. I mean, if you have any doubts about was the Soviet Union all bad, you gotta go watch that film. It's about an hour. It's an hour and 20 minutes. It's on YouTube, and it's a real eye opener because it shows you how arbitrary media is. If they want you to convince yourself of one thing, they'll tell you one thing, and if they want to convince you of something else, the next 5 years later, what was it about? It was about the bad Russians. And people fall for this stuff, and they're not able to make objective judgments about what the reality is. So I cite several movies that have to do with Russia in the article that follows. Another movie that was very, very, very interesting, and that was taken off of YouTube because it's just so embarrassing to U.S. policy, in my opinion. It's called Mission to Moscow. And in that movie, and it's based on an actual true story. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt has just become the president of the United States in 1930. Becomes president in 1934, I think it is. And he's hearing, and there's the Soviet Union has been cut off. It's been sanctioned essentially, and it was after the Soviet Union was created in 1917. It was invaded by the British and the United States and Japan and other countries because they couldn't stand the idea of a socialist country, gaining hold of what had been a royal empire. But of course, the Soviet Union, the people of the Soviet Union, won against the collective West. That sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? Anyway, so Franklin Delano Roosevelt decides that he needs to send a college classmate of his who is a trusted person to find out what exactly is going on there. And he chooses this guy named Joseph M. Davies, who was a lawyer and a Wall Street lawyer who has great respect for the capitalist system. And the movie starts off with a 5-minute introduction by Joseph M. Davies. And he says, I want to introduce this film because I want you to understand why I did it. He says, I wrote this book because I was asked by the President of the United States to give a first-hand report of what is going on in the Soviet Union. And he went there, I think it was in 1935 or 36, and he was given free rein to go wherever he wanted to in the country, interview whoever he wanted to. And finally, at the very end, he ends up meeting Stalin, and he seemed to have a decent meeting with Stalin. And And he's in the beginning of the movies, he said, the reason why we really needed Russia as an ally is because Germany was out of control. They had taken over much of Europe. And he said, if they had conquered the Soviet Union, they would have had control of all of Soviet Union's resources. And Japan, who was also fighting the United States at that time, would have taken over the Pacific. And between these two fascist countries, Germany and Japan, not to mention Italy, which was also ruled by fascists, they would have taken over the entire Eurasian continent. And with that ability, they could have taken over the world. And he said, the United States would have been next on Germany's list. They were planning to attack Mexico, I think. So this is a very, very important movie. And part of that movie it's about the so-called Moscow trials. And it shows, there was a big brouhaha about the inhumane and unjust treatment of people who were apparently opposed to the Soviet Union inside the Soviet Union, and a lot of people were sent to prison, and there was, there's possibility that there was torture being done and these kinds of things. And so here's this guy, he's a trained lawyer, and he goes to the Moscow trials, and he watches these people who had been caught by the police, and they were on trial. And they said, yeah, we were actually collaborating with Trotsky, and Trotsky was collaborating with the Germans and the Japanese because he was so desperate to gain power in Russia that he was willing to give away parts of the Soviet Union in order to become the head of Russia. And he said that it looked credible to me, as a Wall Street trained lawyer, and they gave their testimony, and they made a case that this is exactly what happened. And there was also sabotage going on and things of that nature inside the Soviet Union. So the U.S. has a tendency to blame their target for certain issues when there may be perfectly good reasons why those things are happening. Now, I'm not saying that there weren't some abuses. I know that there was one Polish officer named Rosakowski. I think that's how his name is pronounced. And he was, interrogated very harshly by the police. And they said, you're Polish, and we know the Poles hate our guts. And you're probably conspiring against us. He said, absolutely not. I am not. I am a Soviet person. I am here to help the Soviet Union. And so they acknowledged his innocence, and he went on to be one of the greatest generals of the quote unquote Great Patriotic War. But you had those kinds of things going on. So that's another movie. Then there's other movies that kind of flashing forward, where one of the main themes, of course, in American and Western movies is Russophobia, and we've got to be afraid of the Russians. So I think James Bond movies, there's often Russian gangsters, and there's one recent movie I saw. This is flashing forward to, I don't know, like 3-4 years ago, called Tenet, and Tenet. And Tenet just happens to be, you notice it's spelled Tenet, spelled backwards, it's Tenet. And there's some kind of a puzzle where you can have a puzzle with Tenet with 5 blocks, and however way you do it, diagonally, vertically, or horizontally, it's always going to come out Tenet. And so this movie is about a Russian gangster, naturally, he doesn't want to just take down the United States of America. He doesn't want to just take over Europe. He doesn't even want to take over the world. He wants to destroy the entire space-time continuum. And who is going to save us from him? It's the CIA. The CIA, our wonderful CIA. Thank you, CIA. It's an infomercial for the CIA. And you know, this is brainwashing to the max. It's just, I was watching this movie and I just thought, are people? It's like it's an insult to our intelligence that we would be so blatantly brainwashed by this kind of movie that I went back and watched a Russian movie about some heroes who defeated the fascists. Got more solace out of that. But anyway, there was only one movie that I know of, that I'm aware of, that which is about Russia, called "The Russians Are Coming." The Russians are coming. This was 1966, and it's about a Russian submarine that gets lost off the Atlantic coast, I think off of Maine, and it gets grounded on a reef. And so they're trying to get their submarine off the reef and get the hell out of there. But these Russians, they show up in the small town and the people panic like crazy. And they say, the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming. And all they're trying to do is get back home. And this one guy who's this, very handsome Russian sailor. And he meets this beautiful girl, beautiful American girl, and they fall in love, of course. And so you have this kind of contradiction between these Russians. They're just trying to get home, and it's not like the United States doesn't have ships off of Russia's coast. So this kind of thing goes on all the time. So that's one movie. But then there's another movie that I thought was really great, which was V for Vendetta. V for Vendetta came out in 2008. It was made by the same guy who made, I think it's Wachowski brothers, I think. It was made by the same people who did The Matrix. And it's about, this is 2008, it's about a pandemic, an illness that happens, and it kills a bunch of people. And in the wake of the panic of all this, a politician named Sutler says, I'm going to be the chancellor, and you just have to, let me, have my way so that we can take care of this problem. And towards the beginning of the movie, this guy who's his name is, he calls himself V, and you see his mask now because it's very famous. It's a symbol of rebellion nowadays since that movie. And he says at one point, he sits down and he takes over the TV networks. And he says, now I know you'd like to have a nice time and everything is going to be great, but I think it's time for us to have a little talk. And the thing is, there's something terribly wrong with our country. It's repressive and there's problems, and he does a kind of litany about this issue. And I have the clip for this in the description that follows here on Substack. So there's that. And then later on, there's somebody who's trying to investigate some murders of some high-ranking politicians, and of course, what V has done is he was subjected to this disease, but instead of dying from it, he kind of assumed supernatural powers or supernormal powers. So he's horribly burned when this you could say hospital, which is really it's a biowarfare laboratory with human beings who are being experimented on. So the place burns down, probably because he burns it. He somehow figures out a way to burn it down, but he is burned, seriously burned, and he plots to take down this authoritarian government that has taken over England. And so there's this one scene where this inspector who's investigating all this stuff says to his, and he's investigating the disease that took place simultaneously. And so his assistant comes in one day, and he says, you don't have to answer this question, but I got to ask you this question. If your government were responsible for the deaths of 100,000 people, would you really want to know? And that is a very profound question, because that is the question that we need to be asking of our government, because there have been, 100,000, million people, 2 million people. I had an interaction with somebody recently. We were talking about it's the Russians and the North Koreans. They're the real problem. And I'm thinking, well, let's see. How many cities did the North Koreans burn down, and how many Americans in North America did North Korea burn down? 0. And how many North Koreans died as a result of our attack on North Korea? Something like 3 million. 20% or more of the population was killed by the bombings, as according to a U.S. Air Force general who was basically bragging about it. I think it's Curtis LeMay bragging about it. There was hardly a building standing. And we think that North Korea is the problem. So the question I would ask of people is, if your government was responsible for the deaths of 3 million North Koreans, 3 million Vietnamese, a couple of million Iraqis, and now with this war in Ukraine, where the United States staged an illegal coup in 2014 and fomented a war against the Russian Federation to get hold of its resources, would you really want to know? So these are the kinds of questions that these movies come up with. But the problem is that the movie industry, starting, I would say, with the McCarthy era. So after World War II, instead of the Soviet Union being a friend of the United States, suddenly it turns into the evil empire, and the public, comes down with this severe case of Russophobia, which has been endemic. It's a disease of the mind which has been going on since World War II. How is it that this country that pulled 80% of its people from illiteracy to be just getting people, the first man in space, the first satellite? They lost 27 million people during World War II because of the Nazis, and they're not just Germany, but many of their allied countries, European countries, who are now part of NATO, by the way, many of them part of NATO. What is with all that? So these are the kinds of questions we need to ask. But you see, with the McCarthy era, they suppressed that, and they just demonized communism, they demonized socialism, they demonized Russia, they demonized China, and the rest is history. The result has been that the film industry has been, to a large degree, taken over. Now, as I go on in this article that I write, I cite a clip from George Lucas, who was the creator of the Star Wars movies, and he said that he stopped making movies, Hollywood movies, because they wouldn't allow him artistic freedom. He said, I'm going to say something here, you're not going to believe it, you got to see what he has. He said, Soviet filmmakers had more artistic freedom than American filmmakers have now, because the Soviet filmmakers, they're not supposed to criticize the government, although there were, subtle criticisms in some movies. It wasn't like blatant, but there was some subtle criticism. But in making fun of the Soviet Union, I know that I've seen several Soviet era movies where they're making fun of bureaucracy and foolishness of government. But hey, what's our government runs perfectly efficiently, and nobody's got any problems, right? So it's only those communists who have the problem. It's not us capitalists. We don't have any problems with our the way our government is run, do we? But it's always the other guy's fault, according to the U.S. narrative. But he said the Soviet Union, their people, their filmmakers actually had more artistic freedom. And I show a couple of clips. There's one film that I really like from about 1983 or 84, called Guests from the Future. And it's about this It's about these two guys who are they're like in the 8th or 9th grade or something like that. They're in high school, and they see this strange looking woman, and she's walking across the street, and they're wondering who she is, and they follow her into an abandoned house, and they go into the basement, and she disappears, and they go into this room, and the guy presses a button, and on this kind of strange looking machine, and he's transported 100 years into the future. And so there they are 100 years in the future, and that's where this woman is gone. It turns out that she is an investigator who's investigating these space pirates who are trying to capture a machine that if you have it, you can understand somebody else's thoughts. And she has the professor who developed this machine has a daughter named Elisa. She's a really cute little 8th grade, 9th grade girl. And I've talked with other Russian guys who've seen the movies. They were all in love with her. She's so cute. And but the movie, one of the main the kids in this movie are presented as being they're just kids, but they're nice kids. And there's a theme song for the movie called it's called Guest from the Future, and it's kind of an entreaty towards being kind and honest and sincere. That's what the song is actually about. He says, if a friend's in trouble, I will never abandon my friend, and I will always be pure and kind to people. This is a movie. Do you ever see American movies that are being so blatantly, pedagogic toward the population? There's not a trace of cynicism in that movie. I think that's what I'm talking about. So there have been American movies, that have been very good that way. But Soviet era movies, there are a lot of good ones. Let's see. There's what other movies were there? Hold on just a second. Let me check. Just a minute here. Oh yeah, there's movies. I have a couple of clips from Network, and there's one clip where this guy named Howard Beale, and Howard Beale is a network, like a TV show host, and he gets fired because he's considered to be old and boring. So he says, "Well, the hell with it. I got 2 more weeks. I might as well say what I really want to say." And he says, everybody knows things are bad. The air's no good, the food's no good. You've got to get angry, and don't just write letters to your congressman. I want you to go to your windows right now and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore." Go on, I tell you, go out there, say it. "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore." And then in about 5 minutes, the windows in the street are all opening up, and everybody's yelling, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore." Well, the CEO of this corporation, takes him, and he says, "Look, the world is not nations, it's not people, it's corporations. We run everything. We're doing it for your own good, so shut up and do what we tell you to do." It's basically what he says. So there's 2 clips, one of the CEO, and then one of them is with his "You've got to get mad." And that's pretty cool. And then let's see, what is the couple of, then there's Newsroom, where this guy is asked to say, "Why is America so great?" And fortunately, for some reason, the moderator says, be level with us, will you? And finally, this guy says, "Well, the truth of the matter is America is not the greatest. We don't rank so well in the healthcare. We don't rank so well in education. And, America used to be a great country, but it's not a great country anymore." And, there are kind of opinions based on if you're African American, you may not think that America has been such a great place for you, or a Native American if there's of the 10% who were left after we killed them all, or killed most of them, if America was great ever. But people have this idea of this golden age, and I would say during like the 1950s, after World War II, where unions had quite strong support among the population. There was a lot of union workers, and I have a personal friend. She's a little older than me. She worked for the Communication Workers of America, and her husband worked for AT&T. And they had a decent life. They bought a nice house. They raised a kid. They had had good health care. They had a pension, and so the previous, we're talking about 70 years ago, when the U.S. still had a significant industrial base and a significant union base. Things were a lot better, but they're not now, because the system has been taken over essentially by oligarchs like that guy who's in Network. So that's another movie that's really interesting. And let's see if there's another one. Let me check here. Oh yeah, I talk about the Russians are coming, and the Soviet movies. Then I show there's a couple of other movies, because this is Christmas week. One movie that you might want to watch. It's on YouTube. It's a 1967 production of War and Peace. Now, War and Peace it's like 1,000-page long novel by Leo Tolstoy, who was one of the greatest authors ever, and he was like a really deep thinker and really all-around good person. I think he was like a mentor to Mahatma Gandhi, and he was his own person, So even though he was devout Christian, he didn't like kowtow to the institutional church. But he did this book called War and Peace, and the Soviet Union made a 4-part series of it, starring one of the great Soviet actors at the time, and it's like Roger Ebert says this is the epic film of all time. So if Roger Ebert thinks it's a good movie, then it's probably a good movie. You might want to watch it. And there's a number of other movies. There's like Anna Karenina, which is a great Soviet era movie. They did a lot of really great movies. Let's see. Let me just check one more thing here. Hold on a second. Oh yeah, there's another movie this is an amazing movie. And if you ask Russian people, have you ever seen 17 Moments of Spring? And this movie is about this guy. So he's a high-ranking officer in German intelligence, except that he's actually a Soviet agent. And so everybody thinks that he's this high-ranking, Soviet officer because he speaks fluent German. But he gets a warning from the Kremlin that the Nazis are negotiating with some Americans to create a separate peace between the West and the Nazis in order to then turn against the Soviet Union, which there were actual plans for this. And so this movie, it shows scenes of Allen Dulles, future head of the CIA, negotiating with this General Wolf, who is an SS officer, plotting to make a separate peace. And so the hero of the story, this Russian spy, he recruits some people to go and figure out what's going on. And sure enough, they are able to determine that, in fact, Allen Dulles was plotting behind the back of Franklin Delano Roosevelt to conspire with the Nazis. And at one point in the movie, one of his aides says, "Sir, doesn't this constitute treason for you to be doing this without the permission of the United States?" And Alan Dulles says, "After it's done, it's not going to matter." So this is Alan Dulles, and the character that they create, that they have in the movie, looks just like Alan Dulles. It's really amazing. So. But you can say, "Oh, Eric, those Soviet, they're lying. They're just lying." And then you find out, if you do a little research, you find out something called Operation Sunrise, and you find out that yes, Alan Dulles actually was conspiring with this General Wolf, and I include a clip from a newspaper article. I think it's from the Washington Post. Let's see what it says here. It says. Alan Dulles under the harsh light of history, Operation Sunrise, the secret surrender. And this is from the, and guess where this is posted? It's posted at the CIA reading room. So I keep telling you guys, if you want to know about the real history of the United States, you got to go to the CIA reading room, because that's where, now, I won't say all the bodies are buried there, but they tell you a lot of stuff that's kind of like declassified stuff. And so the CIA is saying, now, maybe the CIA, they're just Putin puppets, but I think that they're probably telling the truth, and the Soviet Union was telling the truth about what was really going on. Why is it that I never heard in my high school years that the CIA director was a traitor to the President of the United States, and he never got prosecuted for it? It's amazing. There's another movie that I refer to called Dead Season, and in that movie, there's an introduction by this guy, and he says, "No, I admit I'm a KGB officer, and I usually don't talk about these things in these movies, but I think that this is important to discuss. And the fact is that there are biological and chemical weapons that are being created in labs in the West with the intention of killing lots of people. And one of them is called Fort Detrick, and another one is called Porton in England, and another one is someplace in Canada. And lo and behold, the anthrax attacks that went right after 9/11, and also that had been associated with, there was a Fort Detrick was shut down, at least for a time, shortly after the outbreak of COVID, and there's research that indicates that Fort Detrick actually was where they were developing these kinds of biological warfare agents. So, and this is a movie, the 1968, they're talking about this stuff. It's amazing. Why weren't we taught about this in 1968, about what our government was doing? It's those dirty Ruskies who are telling you this stuff. Terrible. But anyway, so the reason why I bring all this stuff up is because movies can be a great source of social uplift if they're done right. If there are good people, there are honest people who are trying to do the right thing and bring these kinds of issues to our attention. But of course, as I point out, we are in a war of consciousness where the people who actually run the society, the big wealthy business owners, or the real owners, as George Carlin says, they don't want us to know that, and so they dumb us down with movies like Idiocracy, and who knows what they're putting out now. I have friends in China, and they watch, and young people in Thailand, they're watching these cartoon movies about it's so banal, and it's really a pity that the consciousness of the people is being stolen from them, essentially. So that's basically what I have to say in this video, and I wasn't exactly sure how I would go through it, but it's going a little bit longer than I anticipated. But I hope I've at least entertained you with some histrionics and some information that might be useful to you. So I'll just finish by saying that remember that you can support my channel by making a donation through PayPal or Buy Me a Coffee, or you can subscribe to my channel on Substack, and you can also you can buy one of my information billboard T-shirts. And since I am, since it's the holiday season, I thought I would do, a nice T-shirt like this. It says, be kind, try it today. So you can buy a T-shirt that says "Be kind, try it today," and hopefully you will. I hope that I have raised your consciousness a little bit. I hope you have a happy holiday. I will be taking tomorrow off and having a Christmas dinner with some friends of mine, fellow meditators actually, and then I'll see how it goes. I've got two other, at least one other interview that I'll be doing later on this week, and but I'll be doing more videos. And thanks again for your support. Please be sure to like and share this video if you think there's something useful to it, because my goal here is not to become a millionaire like Tucker Carlson. My goal is to uplift the consciousness of the people so that we can find a way through these dark times, one of the first things we have to do is admit we are in dark times. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you soon.